Today I want to talk about language fitness. Someone asked me, Steve, what's more important in language learning, intensity or perseverance? And this made me think of, physical training. You sometimes do very intense workouts. You train for sprinting, and yet at other times it's more sort of an anaerobic activity, jogging. And I think this has application for language learning, and I thought about the way I have learned different languages, and I think of periods where I went through very intense, levels of activity, and other periods when I just enjoyed the language. I can see it in sort of three different ways. First of all, of course, there is a need for intense activity. There is this Hebbian learning, neurons that fire together, wire together. We have to create some degree of intensity or repetition. However, this quickly loses effectiveness. The more we repeat, the less we learn, the less motivated we become. And it turns out that the dopamine effect of this intense learning and repetition is different from the dopamine effect of more enjoyable engaging with the language, engaging with things of interest. If I am reading a book or listening to a novel or a history narration in the language I'm learning, all along I'm enjoying discovering, learning new things. And so there are lots of periods of sort of dopamine, and that's sort of an intrinsic sense of satisfaction and enjoyment. However, when I say I have to meet a certain goal, I have to spend so much time on the language, I have to finish this lesson, I have to study this word list, or on Link, I have to read so many words or listen, that can push you, but it's almost as if the dopamine kick is in anticipation of achieving that goal, and then of having that sense of satisfaction. But it is not that constant sense of enjoyment that the more relaxed form of, call it more akin to jogging through the forest rather than bench pressing or sprinting. And I remember when I was also a little more active in terms of physical fitness, there was this thing in Sweden called fartlek run, like speed, play, run. So I would run, say go for a jog, but every so often I would sprint, and sort of a combination of the two, so that the jogging, the anaerobic exercise, builds up a base in terms of your anaerobic capacity and so forth, but the sprint builds up that sort of twitch muscle, that ability to bursts of speed, which, again, the relationship to language learning is that this kind of repetition is more likely to build up sort of automaticity, that you will automatically use a word that you've sort of heard repeatedly, but you are always drawing on that base that comes from that larger sort of exposure to the language through enjoyable listening and reading. So to me, it's not a matter of choice. It's much like the fartlek run. You're combining intense with long-term, more enjoyable engagement. When I think of the languages that I have learned, for example, I went through bursts of intensity with French, but then I ended up going to France, and of course there I'm constantly in an intense engagement with French because I was at a university where everything was taught in French. I had to write my exams in French, participate in, classes in French, so forth. Similarly with Mandarin, where I was not in a Mandarin-speaking environment, nevertheless, I was so captivated by this sense of a very exotic culture and the history and, everything related to China was fascinating to me. And I remember thinking to myself that to learn a language, you have to be very intense. And I was in the fortunate position that my employer was paying me to learn Mandarin Chinese, so that's all I did. And I did it with great intensity every day, 5, 6, 7 hours a day. I haven't done that since. It's not possible to continue doing that. Then when we moved to Japan, of course, I was surrounded by Japanese. Not the case in Hong Kong, where I was not surrounded by Mandarin. But in Japan, I was surrounded by Japanese. But still, I would go through periods of intensity, deliberately trying to learn the hiragana, for example, or the Japanese pronunciation of Chinese characters. But mostly exposing myself to the language, listening to Japanese in my car, reading, books where they had a glossary behind each lesson. So again, combining that intensity with, staying with it. I don't leave it for long periods of time. So, if you are on Duolingo or you're using some other system, you can also vary, intensity with more enjoyable types of activities. You may decide you're going to, translate in one direction or another. If you're on Duolingo, you can just do the simple matching pairs, vocabulary pairs, or you can try to do something more difficult. You can also vary that repeatedly listening to easier content with forcing yourself into more difficult content, which might be intrinsically enjoyable because you are engaging with the culture of the country. So I think all of us, we have an opportunity to vary periods of intensity with periods of more casual learning. So in my case, for example, right now I've decided to focus in on Arabic. If I listen to the latest, discussion on Beirut al-Yawm and TV Lebanon, I can maybe have it in the background. I'm picking up some words and phrases. I don't fully understand it. It's going on. That's kind of like a leisurely thing. The curiosity. I'm piqued by, wanting to understand better what they're talking about. So there's some anticipation type dopamine there. When I go and read it and look up the words, I get some sense of satisfaction. It's also dopamine. But in terms of my daily sort of measurement or nudging of myself to do things, if I can get in half an hour to an hour a day of listening, that's going to run up my coins on the link system. And then I go in there and look up the words and, maybe go through the vocabulary, review the vocabulary. And so this is all driving me forward. And so I have a vague sense that I would like to do 10,000 coins. I would like to achieve 10,000 coins a month. I saw that when I was doing Turkish in preparation for going there, I was up to 30,000 coins a month. If I drive the coins, if that's the goal, my identifiable goal, I know that the hours of listening will be there, the words read will be there, all the other stuff will fall into place because the coins is kind of the aggregate of all these other activities. So as long as I'm making sure that, let's say most days I'm getting my goal of 400, 600, 700 coins, but occasionally I drive it up to 1,500 coins and I do that for 2 or 3 days, then it falls back to 400 or 500 coins. That's good enough. I know that all the other things that I need, the listening hours, the creating new links, the learning of words, all of that is going to happen. So I have sort of a simplified goal, a simplified sort of extrinsic goal. I get a sense of satisfaction from achieving that. But eventually, as I understand more and more of what I'm listening to and reading, I get that intrinsic sense of enjoyment of accessing another culture, another history, understanding some of the political events in Lebanon, for example. So you kind of have to combine both. So my answer to that question was, you need both intensity, you need some periods of intensity, and you also need to stay the course and enjoy it. And if you do those two, and it's kind of what I always say, language learning is primarily about attitude and time. So if you stay the course, if you enjoy what you're doing, you will achieve your language goals. Thank you. Bye for now.